Alright guys, and welcome back to Digger Gaming. Today we're going to be looking at something that I'm not too... I don't have a lot of expertise on. It's the Royal Australian Navy and how one Aussie tiny little sloop took on an entire Japanese fleet. I tend to know more about the Army's exploits and what they did in World War II, so this will be a good one to see what the Navy did. The Navy is the ADF senior service and have been pretty much in every conflict, and they're actually quite well trained. I didn't realise that until I met some guys and had a chat to them. But yeah, they're very well trained and do a variety of tasks, and yeah, let's see how this story evolves.
Australia punched well above its weight during the Second World War.
Certainly
From the
did.
battlefields of North Africa to the seas of the Pacific, Australians gained a reputation for fighting to the bitter end. In this video, we illustrate yet another epic last stand from the Royal Australian Navy, where one sloop went up against an entire Japanese flotilla.
Excuse my ignorance, but what is a sloop? Is that just a class of boat? Well, I'm not sure.
This is the story of Robert Rankin, Buck Taylor, and HMAS Yarra. The Grimsby-class sloop HMAS Yarra was launched in 1935 from Cockatoo Island off of Sydney. She had a new design and was built to replace the aging ships built during the Great War.
Yeah.
Her armament consisted of 3 4-inch guns which were primarily designed for high-altitude anti-aircraft defense.
You can see the guns there. They look like little tanks. It's pretty cool. It had naval camouflage as well. Antennas. Yeah, cool.
As secondary armament, Yarra was fitted with 50 cal and 303 machine guns for close anti-aircraft defense.
Alright, so 50 cal, we all know what 50 cals are. 303 is the Lee Enfield British round, so that would have been used probably with a Bren gun or Vickers or something like that.
Her full war complement was 160 officers and crew. When war broke out in September
That's quite a few.
1939, Yarra was sent to bulk up British forces in the Red Sea. As a smaller vessel, the sloop was assigned to escort duties, looking after merchant ships as they transited from British India to Mesopotamia with supplies and reinforcements for the war effort.
Tell you one thing, I used to meet people at the RSL in here that they were in the Merchant Navy, and to be honest, I used to think, ooh, I don't understand why they were at the RSL, but the Merchant Navy put up with a lot. Across all nations, they were targeted pretty heavily. They definitely deserve the RSL Return Serviceman title.
In North Africa. Yarra was attacked by high-flying Italian bombers on several occasions, but the Regia Aeronautica never scored a hit. Yarra maintained her vigil in the Red Sea until April 1941, when German agents successfully staged a coup in Iraq. The pro-British ruler was replaced by Prime Minister Rashid Ali, who planned to boot the British from Iraq once and for all. Yarra's small size meant that she could steam up the Shatt al-Arab River to lend fire support to the Allied landings in Basra. For the next month, Yarra...
See, this is something I had no clue about, but it makes sense as to why Iraq and Iran and all those Middle Eastern countries are still having issues. It's because of the war, but the fact that this little sloop went this far into the Middle East.
Yarra acted as a mobile artillery platform, bombarding Iraqi positions with her 4-inch guns and laying down suppressive fire with her 50s. By May 24th, the landing forces had captured their objectives and Rashid Ali's government was collapsing. The Australian sloop had fought her first battle, but the worst had yet to come. When Axis forces invaded the Soviet Union as part of Operation...
That's some Tarkov stuff right there. Look at this guy. I wonder if that's bulletproof at all.
Operation Barbarossa, Army Group South quickly swept through Ukraine toward the Caucasus. This posed a major threat to British holdings in Iran. Less than 1,000 kilometers separates Tehran from Tbilisi, and the Iranian oil fields were a prize the British could not afford to lose. German agents were active in the country and tolerated by the governing regime. Fearing a situation similar to Iraq, the British and Soviets jointly invaded. The invasion's naval contingent was pulled together from whichever vessels were available nearby. One of them was Yarra, which incidentally was one of the most heavily armed. At 0400 on August 25th, Yarra stemmed from her anchorage at Barsa to the Iranian naval base on the bank of Shatt al-Arab. Here, she attacked and sunk the sloop Babur with 10 salvos from her heavy guns. When two gunboats fought back, Yarra hit them with a hail of machine gun fire before drawing alongside and boarding them.
Jeez.
Cooks and stewards armed with rifles went over the side and captured...
That's something I have to, I find that amazing about the Navy, is you can be a cook 1 minute, next minute you're in battle and your battle stations fighting as a combatant. It's definitely not like that in the Army, or it can be, but yeah, the Navy seems to focus, well, it seems to happen to the Navy a lot more.
One gunboat after another. 90 Iranian and Italian prisoners were thrown in Yarra's brig. Over the next few days, Yarra captured several shore facilities and an Italian freighter. Their naval forces extinguished and facing setbacks on land, the Iranian government accepted...
Almost too successful by the sounds of it. Imagine a brig full of Iranians and Italians while you're still trying to do operations. Nonetheless, check out these guys' chest rigs. Look at the size of these things. It's crazy.
British and Soviet terms on September the 2nd. But Yarra wasn't done. She was immediately sent to the Mediterranean to help resupply the beleaguered troops at Tobruk. Scores of ships ran the gauntlet between the British naval base at Alexandria and besieged Tobruk. They carried ammunition and medical supplies and returned with wounded soldiers. These supply runs, nicknamed by the Aussies the Tobruk Ferry Service, were vital for maintaining the Allied foothold in North Africa. But the Axis knew this too. U-boats stalked the waves and the Luftwaffe prowled the skies in search of these resupply ships. In late 1941, Yarra was constantly at sea as part of the Tobruk Ferry Service. She was attacked by a squadron of 35 Stuka dive bombers on December 7th, but avoided getting
35 Stukas, and how did it not get hit? Wow.
Hit. Her fellow British sloop HMS Flamingo wasn't so lucky, and Yarra towed the incapacitated...
What is that thing? Is that like a little motor thing? Don't know.
Flamingo back to port. This was the last Yarra saw of the Mediterranean. Imperial Japan had announced its entry into the global conflict with the Pearl Harbor attack, and the Australian people felt they were all under threat. All ships were needed in the Pacific.
The Australian people were under threat. I mean, there's a video I did recently about the largest single attack on Australia by Japan, which was bigger than Pearl Harbor. So yeah, we were definitely under threat and definitely feeling it.
Yarra arrived in Batavia in mid-January 1942. She was immediately put to work escorting supply convoys between Java and Singapore. By January's end, the Japanese army was closing in and the British blew up the causeway, separating Singapore from the Malay Peninsula. On February 3rd, a 9-ship convoy entered Sunda Strait bound for Singapore, packed with troops and equipment. Yarra was one of its escorts, along with 3 cruisers, a destroyer, and 2 other sloops. Such a strong presence was supposed to deter the tenacious Japanese. As the convoy neared its destination, Japanese planes appeared in the sky. They dove toward the fleet, dropping bombs and strafing the decks of the freighters. As Yarra was one of the smallest ships present, she was...
That must be horrifying. I can't imagine running to your AA gun quick enough to when you're getting strafed by these things.
Was ignored, but this decision had deadly consequences for the attackers. Yarra spat anti-aircraft fire from all of her guns, striking one plane and sending it tumbling into the sea. More were blown to pieces by interlocking anti-aircraft fire from other ships, but
I have to stop it. This is what my grandfather was during World War II. After World War II, he was an AA gunner for the Nashos. You can see the size of the rounds here. It'd be mostly flak rounds. Two-barrel weapons, yeah. It'd be loud, as you can see this guy's yelling.
the damage was done. The 17,000-ton transport Empress of Asia was on fire.
Jeez.
Soldiers crowded the bow and stern of the vessel to escape the inferno within. Yarra launched her boats and rescued no less than 1,804 men from the stricken transport. She was so overloaded that the new passengers were ordered to sit down so their swaying didn't impact the ship's handling. The soldiers from Empress of Asia were rescued, but all their equipment was lost.
Yeah, that's a lot of soldiers.
Singapore was lost to the Japanese in late February, and control of the waves went with it after the disastrous Battle of the Java Sea on the 28th. The Allies withdrew. Yarra left Cilacap on Java's southern coast on March the 2nd, escorting the depot ship Unking, the tanker Frankol, and the minesweeper MMS 51. Her captain, Robert Rankin, had orders to see the small fleet safely to Fremantle in Western Australia. As Yarra steamed toward her objective, she sighted a seaplane in the distance, but it was too far away to shoot at. It disappeared soon after, and Yarra's crew hoped that that would be the last they saw of their enemy. They were wrong. The seaplane belonged to a detached heavy cruiser squadron of Admiral Kondo's IJN 2nd Fleet. The heavy cruisers are Tago, Takao, and Maya, and the destroyers are
definitely going to have a lot more firepower than the Yarra. And if you've seen an aeroplane as well, it's probably an indication that there's an aircraft carrier. You'd want to steam out of there.
And Waki were stalking the ocean south of Java in search of escaping Allied ships. On the same day Yarra departed, they sank the destroyer USS Pillsbury. There were no survivors. At 6:30 AM on March 4th, Yarra's sirens rung out, urging sailors to their battle stations. The Japanese fleet had been spotted and was steaming directly for the convoy. Rankin ordered the ships to scatter and swung Yarra's bow toward the enemy. Each of the Japanese heavy cruisers had 10 8-inch guns and 8 5-inch guns.
That's a lot.
With nothing but her 3 little 4 inches, Yarra couldn't have been much more outgunned. So what did Rankin do? He charged. Yarra laid a heavy screen of smoke around the convoy, obscuring them from Japanese view. Rankin then put his ship between the convoy and the enemy and beelined for the Japanese. He knew one sloop had no chance against 3 heavy cruisers, but that didn't matter.
That's what I love about some of these Australian World War II stories. It really goes back to show us that we were a small nation. We didn't have as big armies, big navies, big air forces, but we still found a way to do things and to defeat the enemy. Even though it was sort of guerrilla naval warfare, it's pretty cool.
His job was to protect the convoy, and that's what he was going to do. Japanese shells peppered the convoy, and soon fires were raging on Yarra's deck. Behind her, Anking's hull was breached and she went down. Next was the lumbering tanker Frankol. The clouds of black smoke billowed out as her oil caught fire, setting the ocean ablaze. The minesweeper was then sunk by a hail of close-range destroyer fire. Yarra was last. She was set on fire almost immediately, but continued firing against the Japanese fleet for 90 minutes.
Jeez.
She flung shell after shell into the Japanese heavy cruisers, forcing them to open up the distance. Then, at 0800, burning from bow to stern and listing heavily to one side, Rankin gave the order to abandon ship. Seconds later, the bridge was hit, killing him and the whole bridge crew. In a forward gun turret, leading seaman Buck Taylor manned his gun until he went under, despite Rankin's order.
Does anybody know if any medals of gallantry were awarded for this? I know we had one similar, Teddy Sheehan, who manned the guns until his vessel went down. But this seems like a pretty heroic sort of stand too that they did against the Japanese. I'd be surprised if there wasn't any medals of gallantry or valor awarded during this.
He loaded and fired shells alone until Yarra disappeared beneath the waves. After annihilating the convoy, the Japanese did not stop to pick up Yarra's survivors. 5 days later, 13 sailors were picked up by the Dutch submarine K-11.
Jeez.
They were all that remained
13.
of Yarra's 151-man crew. In 2014, Yarra's crew received a posthumous unit citation for gallantry, and in 2001, a Collins-class submarine was named HMAS Rankin in honor of the captain.
That's cool.
Its motto, fittingly, is "Defend the Weak." The brave little sloop.
That's probably more that's probably not better, but you'd probably, as a Navy man, you'd probably rather be called, have a ship named after yourself. That's pretty cool.
Went up against an entire Japanese fleet on its own, throwing everything it had at the enemy to buy time for the unarmed ships to escape. But what do you think? Did you know the Brits and Soviets fought together in Iran? What do you think the Japanese thought when they saw the sloop gunning for them? Why is it that so many Australian ships seem to charge fleets of Japanese ships way larger than themselves?
Alright guys, so that was the story of HMAS Yarra. Pretty cool story. I don't know a great deal about the Australian Navy and their history, so it's good to do these little things about other parts of the Defence Force other than the military, other than the Army. If anyone knows any more about this, let me know. It's pretty cool. A very cool story. So, until next time, cheers.